The wind did not just blow across the high plains of the territory, it scoured. It was a living, invisible thing that hunted for cracks in the earth and weaknesses in the spirit. It stripped the moisture from the soil until the ground was nothing but hard-packed regret, and it bent the scrub grass flat against the dirt as if forcing the land to bow in submission. Above, the sky was a bruised purple and gray, heavy with the threat of a storm that never seemed to break, hanging low over the lonely wagon road that snaked its way toward the cattle town of Red Hollow. Lila Hart walked that road as if she were made of glass that had already shattered and been glue poorly put back together. She wore a travel cloak that had once been a respectable shade of navy wool but was now gray with the dust of 300 miles. The hem was ragged, dragging in the dirt, heavy with the weight of the road. Underneath the cloak, she was half-starved. Her ribs pressed against her skin like the bars of a cage, and her feet were blistered inside boots that had worn through at the sole. Every step was a negotiation with pain. She kept her head down. This was the first rule she had taught herself in the last 2 years. If you look at the ground, nobody looks at your face. If nobody looks at your face, nobody remembers you. Red Hollow appeared on the horizon not as a welcome sight, but as a scar on the landscape. It was a cluster of timber and adobe huddled together against the wind, smoke rising from chimneys in thin, desperate lines. It was a place where cattle drives ended and money changed hands, a town built on sharp rules and sharper gossip. In Red Hollow, a woman alone was a disruption in the natural order. She was either claimed by a man, condemned by the church, or suspected by everyone else. Lila entered the town just as the sun began to dip below the mesa, casting long, distorted shadows across the main street. She did not go to the hotel. She did not go to the sheriff. She went to the back door of the widow Miller's boarding house. Drawn by the smell of boiling potatoes and stale coffee, she gave the name Sarah. It was a plain name, a name that vanished on the tongue. She asked for work, any work, in exchange for a plate of food and a corner to sleep in. The widow Miller, a woman with a face like a dried apple and eyes that missed nothing, looked at Lila's trembling hands and the dark circles under her eyes. She did not ask where Lila came from. She simply pointed to a stack of greasy pans that reached halfway to the ceiling. For 3 days, Lila existed in the steam and heat of the scullery. She scrubbed iron skillets until her knuckles were raw and red. She peeled potatoes until the starch coated her hands like a second skin. She kept her eyes on the sudsy water, flinching whenever the back door slammed or a heavy boot stepped into the kitchen. Boone Carter sat in the dining room on the other side of the wall. He was a man built of rawhide and silence, hired on as a trail hand for the Double Bar Ranch north of town. He had a face that the weather had tried to erase, lined deep by sun and wind, with a jagged white scar running from his left temple down into his beard, a souvenir from a horse that had not wanted to be broken. Boone ate slowly, methodically, his back to the corner of the room. He watched the room the way a wolf watches a tree line, not out of aggression, but out of habit. He noticed things others missed. He noticed that the new dishwasher, the one they called Sarah, never entered the dining room when men were present. He noticed that when the door swung open, she did not just look up, she froze. It was the stillness of a prey animal hoping the predator had not caught its scent. On the 4th evening, the town was restless. The cattle drive from Texas had brought in 30 new hands, and the saloons were spilling noise and violence out onto the boardwalks. Boone was finishing his coffee when the front door of the boarding house opened, and Deputy Hatcher walked in. Hatcher was a man who wore his badge like a weapon. He enjoyed the weight of it. He enjoyed the way people stepped aside when he walked down the center of the aisle. He was looking for a horse thief who had passed through the county, but Hatcher was the sort of man who liked to turn over every stone just to see what squirmed underneath. He walked straight through the dining room and pushed into the kitchen. Boone set his cup down. He did not stand up, but his body shifted, the relaxation leaving his muscles instantly. He listened. In the kitchen, the air went cold. Lila was scrubbing a pot, her back to the door. When Hatcher's boots rang out on the floorboards, she stiffened. She did not turn around until he spoke. "You are new," Hatcher said. His voice was loud, filling the small, steamy room. Lila turned slowly. She kept the pot between them, a shield of cast iron. She kept her chin low, hiding the line of her throat. "Yes, sir, just passing through. Name? Sarah," she said. Her voice was steady, but pitch-perfect in its mediocrity. It was a voice designed to be forgotten. "Sarah Jane." Hatcher stepped closer. The kitchen was narrow, and his presence consumed the available air. He looked her up and down, noting the travel-worn clothes, the way she held the scrubbing brush like a dagger. "Where are you from?" "Sarah Jane." "East," she lied. "Iowa. My husband died of the fever. I'm heading to my sister in California." It was a smooth lie. It was a lie she had practiced 1,000 times in the dark. But Boone, listening from the other room, heard the catch in her breath at the end of the sentence. He heard the way her heart must have been hammering against her ribs. "You have papers?" Hatcher asked. "Town ordinance says transients need to register if they stay more than 2 nights. Lila's hand slicked with soapy water. She gripped the metal rim of the sink. "I lost them. Sir, my wagon turned over in the river crossing near the Platte. I lost everything." Hatcher narrowed his eyes. He took another step. He was close enough now to smell the fear on her. Sharp and acrid. He reached out, not to arrest her, but to tilt her chin up, to force her to look him in the eye. It was a power move, a small cruelty. "Look at me when you speak," Hatcher commanded. Lila flinched. It was a violent, involuntary jerk, as if he had burned her. She pulled back, her back hitting the edge of the stove. The panic in her eyes was not the panic of a woman caught without papers. It was the panic of a woman who had seen the devil and expected him to return. Boone was in the doorway before Hatcher could speak again. He moved with a quietness that was startling for a man of his size. One moment the doorway was empty, and the next, Boone filled it. He did not draw a weapon. He did not raise his voice. He simply occupied the space, changing the temperature of the room. "Deputy," Boone said. His voice was like gravel grinding together. Hatcher spun around, his hand dropping to his belt. When he saw it was Boone, he relaxed slightly, but the annoyance flared in his face. "This is official business. Carter, go finish your coffee. Coffee is done," Boone said. He looked at Lila, just for a second, his eyes cataloging the terror in her posture. Then he looked back at the deputy. "The widow Miller does not like lawmen bothering her help during the dinner rush. Bad for digestion." Hatcher bristled. "She has no papers. She is washing dishes, not running for mayor," Boone said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar. He flipped it onto the counter next to the sink. It spun and settled with a heavy ring. "That covers her registration fee. You can write it up at the office." Hatcher looked at the coin, then at Boone, and finally, back at Lila. He sneered, a tight expression that showed his yellowed teeth. "You vouching for her, Carter?" "I'm paying for her," Boone corrected. "There is a difference." Hatcher grunted. He felt the shift in the room. He knew Boone Carter's reputation. Boone was not a gunfighter, but he was a man who did not back down, and he had a stillness about him that made loud men nervous. Hatcher snatched the coin from the counter. "Get your papers sorted. Sarah," Hatcher warned, pointing a finger at her. "Next time, I take you in." He brushed past Boone, his shoulder checking the cowboy's chest, and stomped out of the kitchen. The silence that followed was heavy. The steam from the dishwater rose in curling wisps, twisting in the lantern light. Lila did not move. She stared at the empty doorway where the lawman had been, her chest heaving. Boone stayed where he was. He did not crowd her. He gave her the width of the room. "He is gone," Boone said softly. Lila turned on him. The fear had curdled instantly into anger. It was a defense mechanism, a wall slamming down. "I did not ask for your help." "I know," Boone said. "I can handle my own affairs." "I saw how you handled them," Boone replied. He kept his hands open, hanging loose at his sides. showing he was no threat. "You lie well, miss, but your hands shake when you stop talking." Lila grabbed a towel and wiped her hands aggressively, as if trying to scrub off the trembling. "You wasted $1. I cannot pay you back." "I did not ask for payment." "Men always ask for payment," she snapped. Her eyes were hard, flinty things. Eventually, Boone looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the bruises she tried to hide with the high collar of her dress. He saw the way she stood with her weight on one leg, favoring the other. "I am walking you back to your room when you are done," Boone stated. It was not a question. "I sleep here, in the pantry." "Not tonight," Boone said. "Hatcher will be drinking across the street. He will watch this place. If he sees you sleeping in a pantry like a stray dog, he will come back. You need to look like a paying boarder. I paid the widow for a room upstairs for you." Lila froze. "Why?" "Because I hate a bully," Boone said simply. "And I have seen the look in your eyes before. It is the look of a trapped animal." "I am not an animal," she hissed. "Then stop living like one," Boone said. His voice was not unkind, but it was blunt. "Take the room. Lock the door. I will sit on the porch until morning." Lila stared at him. She searched his face for the trick, the trap, the hidden demand. She found only a tired map of scars and a pair of brown eyes that looked at her with a terrifying lack of judgment. "I do not trust you," she said. "Good," Boone nodded. "That keeps you alive. Lock the door." He turned and walked out to the porch, leaving her alone in the steam. Lila did not sleep. The room Boone had paid for was small, smelling of lavender and old dust. It had a bed with a real mattress and a window that looked out over the alley. Lila pushed the heavy oak dresser in front of the door. Then she wedged a chair under the handle. Then she sat on the floor in the corner, her knees pulled up to her chest, wrapped in her travel cloak. She closed her eyes, and the memory came, unbidden and sharp as a knife. Clang. The sound of the iron door slamming shut, the heavy, damp air of the cell, the smell of unwashed bodies and despair. The courtroom. The judge sat high above her, a man with a beard like snow and a heart like granite. The gavel came down. Bang. "Guilty," he said. The word echoed. It bounced off the walls and filled her ears until she could hear nothing else. And then, the other memory, the one that came before the cage. Silas Crow. She could smell him. Expensive tobacco and bay rum. She could feel the weight of his hand on her throat. It was a heavy hand, adorned with a gold ring set with a ruby that dug into her windpipe. "You belong to me. Lila, I bought the debt. I bought the farm. I bought you." His face was close to hers, red with whiskey and entitlement. He was laughing. He thought her struggles were part of the game. He thought her no was just a flavor of yes. Lila's hand went to her throat in the dark room of the boarding house. She traced the invisible line where the ring had pressed. She felt the phantom pressure, the inability to breathe. She remembered the letter opener on the desk. She remembered her hand closing around it. She remembered the look of shock on his face when the steel went in. He hadn't believed she would do it. He hadn't believed a thing he owned could kill him. "Murderess!" the prosecutor had shouted. "Survivor?" she whispered into the darkness of Red Hollow. But the law did not care about the difference. To them, she was a woman who had killed a pillar of the community. She was property that had destroyed its owner. She opened her eyes. The room was silent. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window pane. She could not stay here. Hatcher had seen her. He had looked at her with that hunter's gaze. He would check the wires. He would check the wanted posters. It might take a day, maybe 2, but the telegraph lines moved faster than a horse. She had to leave. Now! She stood up, her legs stiff. She gathered her few belongings: a comb, a piece of dried beef she had stolen from the kitchen, a small canteen. She wrapped her cloak tight around her. She went to the window. It was the second floor, but there was a trellis covered in dead ivy that ran down to the alley. She had climbed worse. She had climbed the prison wall in the rain with a bullet grazing her shoulder. She pushed the window up. It groaned in the sash. a sound like a dying bird. She froze, waiting. No sound from the hallway. She swung her leg over the sill. The cold night air hit her like a slap. It smelled of sagebrush and horse manure. She climbed down, her boots finding purchase on the thick vines. She dropped the last few feet, landing in the soft dirt of the alley with a dull thud. She stayed crouched, listening. The alley was dark, a canyon of shadows between the back of the livery stable and the boarding house. The wind whipped down the narrow space, funneling dust into her eyes. She stood up and turned toward the north. The northern route led to the Badlands. It was dangerous, empty country, but it was the only way out that didn't go past the sheriff's office. She took 2 steps. "You will not make a mile," a voice said from the shadows. Lila spun around, her hand diving into her pocket for the small knife she had stolen from the kitchen. Boone stepped out from the overhang of the livery stable. He was wrapped in a heavy duster coat, his hat pulled low. He held a cigarette in one hand, the cherry glowing bright red in the darkness before he dropped it and crushed it under his heel. "Get out of my way," Lila hissed. "The northern route is closed," Boone said. He did not move toward her. He stood like a boulder in the stream of the alley. "I heard it at the saloon. Raiders hit a wagon train near the gap yesterday. They are burning everything on the road." "I do not care," Lila said. Her voice was shaking, but it was the shake of adrenaline, not weakness. "I will take my chances with the raiders. They will not just kill you," Boone said. His voice dropped an octave, becoming grave. "They will take their time. You know that." "I know what happens when men take their time," she spat back. "I would rather die in the open than in a cage." She took a step forward, trying to go around him. Boone moved. He stepped into her path, blocking the exit to the open plains. "Move," she warned. She pulled the knife. It was a paring knife, small and pathetic against a man of his size, but she held it like she knew how to use it. Boone looked at the knife. He did not laugh. He did not reach for his gun. He looked at her face. He saw the sheer, overwhelming exhaustion warring with a will of iron. "You are running from the law," Boone said. It was a statement, not a question. "That is none of your business." "It is my business if I let you walk out there to get butchered," Boone said. "I cannot let you do that." "You have no right," she said. Tears of frustration pricked at her eyes, hot and stinging. "You do not own me. You do not know me. I am nothing to you." "You are a human being standing on the edge of a cliff," Boone said. "I am the man standing in the way." Lila lunged. It was a feint, a desperate attempt to startle him so she could run past. But Boone was faster than he looked. He caught her wrist. He did not squeeze. He did not twist. He simply held her. His hand was large, rough, and warm. It engulfed her wrist, immobilizing the knife without hurting her. Lila struggled. She pulled against his grip, her boots slipping in the dirt. She struck at his chest with her free hand, a hollow thump against the heavy canvas of his coat. "Let me go," she cried out, her voice cracking. She looked up at him. The moon had broken through the clouds, illuminating the alley in a wash of pale silver. She saw his face clearly. He wasn't angry. He looked sad. He looked like a man who was holding back a flood with his bare hands. "Let me go, Cowboy," she hissed, the nickname dripping with venom and desperation. He looked down at her. He felt the trembling in her arm. He felt the frantic pulse under the skin of her wrist. He knew that if he let go, she would run until her heart burst or a bullet found her. "No," Boone said. The word hung in the air between them. "No," he repeated. "I will not." He held her, not roughly, just firmly, like someone holding a door against a storm. "If you go north, you die," Boone said. "If you stay here, Hatcher finds you. Those are not choices." "I have no others," Lila shouted, though she kept her voice to a harsh whisper. "I have nothing else." "You have time," Boone said. "Wait, give me 2 days. I can arrange a wagon with the supply train going west to the railhead. They have armed guards. You can slip in with the cook's crew. It is safer." "Why?" Lila demanded. She stopped fighting, though she did not pull away. She stared at him, searching for the lie. "Why would you do this? What do you want?" Boone slowly released her wrist. He stepped back, giving her the space she needed to breathe. But he stayed between her and the northern road. "I had a sister," Boone said. The words came out hard, as if he had to drag them up from a deep well. "She ran away. Nobody stopped her. Nobody helped her." He looked away, toward the dark horizon. "I found her a year later. I do not want to find you like that." Lila lowered the knife. Her hand fell to her side. The fight drained out of her, leaving her hollow and shaking in the cold wind. "I cannot go back to prison," she whispered. "I will not go back." "I am not a lawman," Boone said. "I am just a hand, and I'm telling you, wait, trust me for 2 days." Lila looked at the dark shape of the Badlands in the distance, then back at the scarred man standing in the mud of the alley. She was terrified of him. She was terrified of his kindness, because kindness was usually the bait in the trap. But she was also tired, so incredibly tired. The first spark of tension landed in the space between them. It wasn't romance. It wasn't love. It was something sharper, forged in the high-stakes gamble of survival. Lila wanted freedom. Boone wanted her alive. 2 days, she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "If you betray me, I will kill you." Boone tipped the brim of his hat. He did not smile. "Fair enough. Now put the knife away," he said gently, "and go back to your room. I will be right here." Lila hesitated. She looked at the open road one last time, the path to certain death that felt like freedom. Then she looked at Boone, the obstacle that felt like a cage but looked like a shield. She turned and climbed back up the trellis. Boone watched her go. He waited until he heard the window slide shut and the latch click. Then he leaned back against the rough wood of the livery stable, lit another cigarette, and settled in for the long watch. The wind howled around him, carrying the scent of rain and trouble. But for tonight, the alley was quiet. The morning sun did not bring warmth to the high plains. It only brought visibility to the desolation. The wind was still cutting from the north, carrying the scent of frost and dry sage. Boone Carter rode a roan gelding, sitting easy in the saddle, while Lila Hart sat stiffly on the buckboard seat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. They were 5 miles out of Red Hollow, heading toward the limestone ridges that marked the boundary of the Double Bar Ranch. Boone had spent the better part of the dawn hour convincing the foreman, a wire-thin man named Pike, that the ranch needed extra hands in the kitchen with the roundup approaching. "She is a cousin of a friend from Abilene." Boone had lied, his voice flat and calm. "Widowed, young, hard worker. She needs a place to wait out the winter before moving west." Pike had spat a stream of tobacco juice at a beetle and nodded. "If she can peel a potato without crying about her manicure, she is hired." Hattie is complaining about her knees again. Now? The silence between Boone and Lila was louder than the creak of the wagon wheels. Lila stared at the horizon, her jaw set. She hated this. She hated the feeling of being handled, of being moved across the board like a pawn in someone else's game. She had spent 2 years in a prison cell where every movement was dictated by a guard's key. Freedom was supposed to be the absence of permission. Yet here she was, relying on a cowboy's lie to secure a roof over her head. "You do not have to like it," Boone said, keeping his eyes on the trail. "You just have to survive it?" Lila turned her head slowly to look at him. The bruise on her cheek was fading to a sickly yellow, hidden partially by the brim of the bonnet Boone had bought her at the mercantile. "I am not a piece of livestock you found wandering the fence line. Carter, I do not need you to find me a stall. Hattie runs a clean kitchen," Boone replied, ignoring the bite in her tone. "The work is hard, but nobody will ask you questions. The boys on the crew are rough, but they know better than to bother the kitchen staff. Hattie would take a cleaver to them." "And what happens when the 2 days are up?" Lila asked. "You said 2 days. I'm working on it," Boone said. The wagon train I mentioned is delayed at the river crossing. High water. You are safer at the double bar than in a boarding house where Hatcher can walk in whenever he gets bored. Lila looked back at the road. She knew he was right, and that made the resentment burn hotter. She was angry at her own helplessness. She was angry that the price of safety was dependence. The Double Bar Ranch was a sprawl of low-slung timber buildings nestled in the lee of a mesa. The main house was modest, built of stone, but the barns were massive, and the corrals were full of restless cattle. The bunkhouse and the cookhouse sat apart, smoke curling from the iron stovepipe of the latter. When they pulled up, a woman stepped out onto the porch of the cookhouse. This was Hattie. She was a woman of indeterminate age, perhaps 50, perhaps 70. She was shaped like a barrel and moved with the unstoppable momentum of a boulder rolling downhill. Her hair was gray and pulled back so tight it pulled her eyebrows up, and her apron was stained with flour and blood. "Is this the stray?" Hattie called out, wiping her hands on a rag. Lila bristled. Climbing down from the wagon before Boone could offer a hand, "I am not a stray. My name is Sarah." Hattie looked her up and down, her eyes sharp as flint. She saw the worn boots, the thin frame, the way Lila held herself ready to run or fight. Hattie grunted. "Sarah, Sarah Jane, Sarah Louise. Whatever it is, if you can haul water and chop onions, I do not care if you are the Queen of England. Get inside. The stew is not going to thicken itself." Lila looked at Boone. He touched the brim of his hat. A silent dismissal. "I have fences to ride," he said. "I will see you at supper." Lila turned her back on him and walked into the heat of the kitchen. The work was not hard. It was brutal. The ranch kitchen was an engine that required constant fuel. There were 30 men to feed, 3 times a day. Lila's world shrank to the dimensions of the scullery. She woke before the sun, in the small lean-to room attached to the back of the cookhouse that Hattie had cleared out for her. The air was so cold that the water in the basin had a crust of ice that had to be broken with a knuckle. Her first task was hauling water from the creek. The creek was a quarter-mile down a rocky path, and the buckets were heavy oak. The water was glacial, runoff from the high peaks, and it numbed her fingers until they felt like dead wood. By mid-morning, her hands were red and raw. By evening, they were cracked and bleeding, but the work was a shield. When she was scrubbing a cast-iron pot with sand and lye soap, she did not have to think about the judge. When she was kneading dough until her shoulders burned, she did not have to think about the ring on Silas Crow's hand. Hattie was a taskmaster, but she was not cruel. She watched Lila with a critical eye, correcting her when she sliced the salt pork too thick or didn't stoke the fire high enough. But there was a practical warmth to the older woman. On the third day, Lila was sitting on a stool, peeling a mountain of potatoes. Her knife slipped, nicking her thumb. She hissed, sucking the blood. Hattie turned from the stove. She walked over, grabbed Lila's hand, and inspected the cut. She did not offer sympathy. Instead, she reached into a jar on the shelf and scooped out a glob of pungent salve, smearing it over the cut and the cracked skin of Lila's knuckles. "Tallow and beeswax," Hattie said. "Smells like a dead sheep, but it keeps the skin from splitting." "Thank you," Lila mumbled. "You have soft hands," Hattie observed, wiping her own hands on her apron. "Not working hands, not yet." "I have worked," Lila said defensively. "Doing what? Needlepoint?" Hattie snorted. "You have the hands of a woman who is kept indoors, but you have the eyes of a woman who has spent a lot of time looking over her shoulder." Lila froze, the knife hovering over a potato. "My husband? Save the story for the Cowboys. Girl," Hattie interrupted, turning back to her biscuits. "I do not care where you came from. I care that you are here and you are not lazy. A woman alone in this territory has reasons for being alone. Usually, they are bad reasons. As long as you do not steal the silver or burn the bread, your business is your own." Lila let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. It was the first time in years she felt seen without being assessed for value. Hattie didn't want to own her. She just wanted the potatoes peeled. There was a profound dignity in that transaction. Boone kept his distance during the days. He was just another hand, covered in dust and smelling of horse sweat. But in the evenings, after the crew had eaten and dispersed to the bunkhouse to gamble or sleep, he would linger on the porch of the cookhouse. He would chop wood for the morning fire, his axe falling with a rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack that echoed off the barn walls. Lila would bring a bucket of scraps out for the pigs, and they would stand there for a moment in the twilight. One evening, a storm rolled over the mesa. It was a true high plains thunderstorm, violent and majestic. The sky turned a bruised purple, and lightning forked down like cracks in a black mirror. The thunder shook the ground under their boots. Lila stood on the porch, watching the rain sheet down. Boone stood by the woodpile, a slicker draped over his shoulders. "It will pass by morning," Boone said. "It feels like it will tear the roof off." Lila said, "The roof is solid." Boone replied, "It has held for 20 years. They stood in silence, watching the violence of the sky. It was a comfortable silence. Lila realized with a start that she was not afraid of him. When he stood near her, she didn't flinch. He was part of the landscape, like the mesa or the wind, a constant, unbending force. "You stand like a fence post, cowboy," Lila said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Do you ever relax?" "If I relax, the cows get out," Boone said. He looked at her, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "You look better. The hollows in your cheeks are filling in." "Hattie feeds me well," Lila said. "She says I am too skinny to be of use in a strong wind." "Hattie is wise," Boone said. "Do you still hate me for bringing you here?" Lila looked out at the rain. "I hate needing help. There is a difference." "Everyone needs help out here. Sarah," he said, using her false name effortlessly. "The land is too big to face alone. A man who tries to stand alone usually ends up as a pile of bones for the coyotes." The coyotes were singing now, a chaotic yipping chorus rising from the dark scrub beyond the corral. It was a lonely, hungry sound. "I am not a man," Lila said softly, "and the coyotes in the cities wear suits." Boone's expression darkened. He stepped onto the porch, out of the rain, bringing with him the smell of wet wool and tobacco. "We need supplies tomorrow. Flour, coffee, beans. Pike wants me to take the wagon into Red Hollow. Hattie says you need to come to help select the produce. She says I do not know a good turnip from a rock." Lila stiffened. "I cannot go back there." "You have to," Boone said. "If you hide out here forever, people talk. If you go into town, do your business, and leave, you're just the ranch cook's helper. Hiding makes you guilty. Living makes you invisible." Lila gripped the railing. She knew he was right. It was the logic of the fugitive. Act normal. Be boring. "Fine," she said. "But if I see Hatcher, I'm taking the wagon and leaving you behind." "Fair enough," Boone said. The trip to Red Hollow was an exercise in tension. Lila wore her bonnet pulled low, and she wore a plain calico dress Hattie had lent her. It was too big in the waist, making her look shapeless and matronly. The town was busy. It was Saturday, and the ranchers were in. Wagons clogged the main street, and the wooden sidewalks were thumping with boots. Boone parked the wagon in front of the general store. "Stay close," he murmured. "Head down. Business only." They went inside. The store smelled of pickle brine, leather, and peppermint. Lila moved to the produce bins, inspecting sacks of onions and crates of shriveled apples. She felt eyes on her. 2 women stood by the fabric counter. One was the banker's wife, Mrs. Higgins, a woman encased in silk and self-righteousness. The other was the wife of the local doctor. They were whispering, their heads bent together like conspirators. Lila tried to ignore them. She focused on the apples. "1 bushel, keep the bad ones out. That is her." "Mrs." Higgins' voice carried, sharp and loud enough to be heard. "The one living at the double bar." "With the men," the doctor's wife gasped. "Unsupervised?" "They say she is a cousin." Mrs. Higgins sniffed. "But we know what kind of woman lives in a bunkhouse with 30 men. And Boone Carter, well, he has always been a strange one. I dare say she is his kept woman. Why else would he pay her board at the Widow Miller's that first night? Lila's hand froze on an apple. The blood rushed to her face, hot and stinging. Kept woman. Whore. The words were not new to her. Silas Crow had called her worse things while he was hurting her, but hearing them here, in the open, felt like a slap. It is shameful, the doctor's wife added. She brings trouble. You can see it in her face. A woman with no people is a woman with no morals. Lila dropped the apple. It rolled across the floor, stopping at Boone's boots. Boone picked up the apple. He walked over to the women. He did not shout. He did not look angry. He looked incredibly disappointed. He tipped his hat. "Good morning, ladies," Boone said. His voice was a low rumble. "This is Sarah. She is working for Hattie. She works harder before breakfast than most people do all week. I would appreciate it if you let her buy the onions in peace. Mrs. Higgins turned a shade of puce. "Well, I never—" "Come on, Sarah," Boone said, turning his back on them. "We have what we need." Lila walked out of the store, her spine stiff, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She climbed into the wagon and stared straight ahead. "Drive," she said. They rode in silence until they were well clear of the town. The humiliation was a cold stone in her stomach. It wasn't just the insults. It was the danger. Gossip drew attention. Attention brought the law. When they reached the ranch, Lila did not help unload the wagon. She walked straight to the cookhouse, went to her lean-to, and began shoving her few belongings into a burlap sack. She was done. She was leaving. She would take a horse, steal one if she had to, and ride until the horse died or she did. The door to the lean-to opened. Boone filled the frame. "Get out," Lila said, not looking up. She was rolling her extra dress into a tight bundle. "You are running again," Boone said. He stepped inside and closed the door. The room was tiny, and his presence made it feel microscopic. "I am not staying here to be called a whore by a bunch of hens in silk dresses." Lila spat. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "You said I would be invisible. I am the talk of the town." "They talk because they are bored," Boone said. "It means nothing." "It means everything." Lila threw the bundle onto the narrow cot. "They look at me, and they see dirt. They see something broken. And if they look close enough, they will see the truth." "And what is the truth, Lila?" Boone asked. It was the first time he had used her real name since the alley. "The truth is that I am poison," she whispered. The fight went out of her, replaced by a crushing exhaustion. She sat down on the edge of the cot, her hands shaking. "Everywhere I go, I bring ruin. I should have let the raiders take me on the northern road." Boone took a step closer. He took his hat off and held it in his hands, turning the brim in a slow circle. "I do not know your story," Boone said quietly. "I do not know what happened back east, but I know the way you carry fear. You carry it like a loaded gun in your pocket, with the hammer pulled back. You are waiting for it to go off." Lila looked up at him. "Because it always goes off." "Not always," Boone said. He sat down on a wooden crate opposite her. "I have a history too. Sarah, 7 years ago, in Kansas, I killed a man." Lila blinked. The confession hung in the air. "It was a range war," Boone continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "He was on the other side. He was young. He had a family. I shot him because he was going to shoot me. It was legal. It was war. But I see his face every time I close my eyes. I came here to get away from it, to find a place where the ground wasn't soaked in blood." He looked at her, his dark eyes open and vulnerable. "We are all running from something," Boone said. "But if you run now, you just verify their lies. You prove them right. You stay, and you prove you are just a woman doing a job." Lila looked at her hands. I was not just in trouble," she said haltingly. "I was sold." Boone went very still. "My father owed money," she said. The words came out like broken glass. "Silas Crow paid the debt. and he took me as the receipt. I was 19. I lived in his house for 3 years. I was not a wife. I was not a servant. I was a thing. She looked up at Boone, defying him to judge her. That is what they see when they look at me. They smell the ownership on me. No, Boone said firmly. I do not see that. What do you see? I see a woman who survived hell and walked out the other side. Boone said, I see a woman who has more courage in her little finger than Mrs. Higgins has in her whole life. The air in the small room changed. It grew thick, charged with something that was not quite fear and not quite comfort. It was the heat of two people standing very close to a fire. Lila looked at his mouth. She saw the scar that cut through his beard. She wondered what it would feel like to touch it. You are a fool. Boone Carter, she whispered. I have been called worse, he said. He leaned forward. It was a slow movement, giving her 1,000 chances to pull away. She didn't. She leaned in, drawn by a gravity she couldn't name. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but for the first time, it wasn't from terror. It was from want. Their faces were inches apart. She could feel the warmth of his breath. She closed her eyes. Tilting her head, bang! The door to the cookhouse main room slammed open. Carter! A voice bellowed. Where are you hiding? Boone jerked back as if he had been scalded. Lila gasped, pulling her cloak tight around her chest. It was Pike, the foreman. He stomped through the kitchen and kicked the door to the lean-to open wider. He didn't seem to notice the flush on Lila's cheeks or the tension in Boone's shoulders. There you are, Pike grunted. Stop lollygagging with the help. We have a problem. Boone stood up, putting his hat back on, pulling the brim low to hide his eyes. What is it? Pike. Traveling preacher just rode in, Pike said, spitting tobacco onto the dirt floor of the lean-to. Brother Thomas, he is posting notices on the barn door. Says there is a big meeting tomorrow after services. So? Boone asked. The circuit riders come through every spring. Not like this, Pike said, his face grim. He says he has news from the southern counties. Says there is a wave of crime moving north. Horse thieves, cattle rustlers, and fugitives. Lila went cold. She sat perfectly still on the cot. He says the Marshals are sweeping the territory. Pike continued. They are sending a team up here to Red Hollow next week. They are going to comb every ranch and line shack from here to the border. Pike looked at Lila, then back at Boone. Brother Thomas wants every soul at the meeting tomorrow. He says judgment is coming. Pike turned and walked out. Boone stood there for a moment. He looked at Lila. Her face had gone pale, all the blood draining away. The intimacy of the moment before was shattered, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the noose. Marshals, she whispered. We have time, Boone said, though his voice lacked the certainty it had held before. Next week, that gives us a week. They are coming for me, she said. They are coming for everyone, Boone said. But we will be ready. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. Do not pack that bag. Sarah, not yet. He walked out into the gathering dark, leaving Lila alone with the sound of the wind and the echo of the foreman's words. Judgment is coming. The dust announced them before their badges did. It rose in a twin plume against the slate-gray sky to the south, marking the approach of riders who moved with the steady, ground-eating pace of men who were paid by the mile. Lila Hart stood at the window of the cookhouse, her hands deep in a bowl of biscuit dough. The flour dusted her wrists like snow, a stark white against the red-chapped skin of her hands. She watched the riders crest the ridge that separated the double-bar grazing lands from the county road. Boone was in the corral, breaking a Greenbroke colt. She could see him through the pane of glass, his body moving in rhythm with the bucking animal, loose-limbed and calm in the center of violence. The riders turned off the main track and headed for the ranch gate. Lila stopped kneading. Her heart gave a single, hard thump against her ribs, then began to race with the frantic speed of a trapped bird. She wiped the glass with her apron, squinting against the afternoon glare. The lead rider wore a duster coat stained with the clay of the southern territories. He rode a heavy bay horse. As he drew closer, The sunlight caught the flash of silver on his chest. But it was not the badge that froze the blood in Lila's veins. It was the way he sat. It was the tilt of his head. It was the thick, black mustache that curled over his upper lip. Deputy Vance. The name echoed in her mind, bringing with it the smell of damp stone and the sound of chains rattling. Vance had been the one to transport her from the county jail to the state penitentiary. He was the one who had laughed when she asked for water. He was the one who had told her, with a casual cruelty she would never forget, that pretty things broke faster in prison. He was here. Lila did not think. Thought was a luxury for people who were not hunted. She acted on pure, animal instinct. She abandoned the doe. She wiped her hands frantically on her apron, leaving white streaks like war paint on the fabric. She ducked out the back door of the cookhouse, moving low, keeping the bulk of the building between her and the approaching riders. The ranch yard was busy. Hands were moving bales of hay. The blacksmith was hammering at his anvil. The noise covered the sound of her boots on the hard-packed earth. She did not go to her room. She did not pack a bag. There was no time for clothes or food. She ran toward the small corral behind the barn where the night horses were kept, the steady, reliable mounts used for checking the herd in the dark. A sorrel mare stood dozing near the rail. Lila grabbed a bridle from the post. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the bit twice before forcing it into the mare's mouth. She didn't bother with a saddle. A saddle took time. A saddle was heavy. She vaulted onto the mare's bare back, gripping the mane with flour-dusted fingers. "Easy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Run!" She kicked the mare's flanks. The horse, surprised, bolted forward. Lila reined her hard to the left, away from the main gate, toward the north pasture and the jagged spine of the badlands beyond. As she cleared the corner of the barn, she heard a shout. "Hey, Sarah!" It was Pike, the foreman. Lila did not look back. She leaned low over the mare's neck, urging the horse into a gallop. The wind tore at her bonnet, ripping it from her head. It tumbled away behind her, a small piece of her false life discarded in the dirt. She rode for the broken country. She rode as if the devil himself were snapping at the mare's heels. Boone Carter had seen the deputies arrive. He had stepped down from the colt, wiping sweat from his forehead, intending to see what news they brought from the south. But then he had seen the movement behind the barn. He had seen the flash of calico and the desperate scramble of a rider on a bareback horse. He knew instantly. It was not a rational deduction. It was a gut punch. He watched the two lawmen rein in by the main house. They looked tired. They were not riding with guns drawn. They were likely just looking for fresh horses or water. But Lila, Sarah, had not waited to ask. She had seen a ghost, and she had run. Boone did not approach the deputies. He turned to the colt he had just dismounted, tightened the cinch, and swung back into the saddle. "Pike!" Boone yelled. The foreman was staring at the dust cloud Lila had left behind. "That girl has gone crazy. She stole the sorrel." "I will get her," Boone said. His voice was calm, masking the sudden, cold fear in his chest. "She spooked. I will bring her back." "If she ruins that horse, I will take it out of your pay," Pike shouted. Boone did not answer. He spurred the colt. The young horse, already worked up, launched itself forward. Boone guided it not toward the gate, but toward a gap in the fence line that cut 5 miles off the route to the Badlands. He had to catch her. The Badlands in the dark were not just difficult, they were a death sentence. The ground was riddled with box canyons, hidden drops, and shale that crumbled under a hoof. And behind the geography was the weather. The bruised sky was finally making good on its threat. The temperature was dropping fast, and the smell of rain was heavy and metallic in the air. He rode hard. The wind whipped his face, stinging his eyes. He watched the ground, reading the tracks Lila's mare left in the soft earth. She was riding recklessly, letting the horse choose its own footing, a sign of panic that terrified him more than the speed. The sun began to set, bleeding red across the western horizon before being swallowed by the advancing storm clouds. The light turned gray, then a deep, bruised blue. The terrain changed. The rolling grass of the ranch gave way to the broken teeth of the Badlands. The earth here was stripped bare, eroded by wind and water into fantastic, nightmarish shapes. Hoodoos rose like silent sentinels, and deep ravines cut through the land like hatchet wounds. The tracks led up a narrow ridge. It was a spine of rock with a steep drop on either side. Boone slowed the colt. The footing was treacherous. "Easy, son," he murmured. "Easy." He saw the mare ahead. It had stopped. Lila was off the horse, pulling at the reins, trying to force the animal down a slope that was too steep. The mare was balking, rolling its eyes, planting its feet. "Sarah!" Boone shouted. The wind tore the name from his mouth. Lila spun around. In the dying light, her face was a pale mask of terror. She saw him, but she did not see safety. She saw pursuit. "Go back!" she screamed. She let go of the reins and scrambled away from him, moving toward the edge of a deep ravine where the shadows were absolute. "Lila, stop!" Boone yelled. He bailed off the colt, letting the reins trail. He ran toward her, his boots sliding on the loose shale. Lila reached the edge. The ravine dropped 50 feet into darkness. She looked down, then back at Boone. For one terrifying second, Boone thought she was going to jump. She looked like she would rather embrace the fall than be taken. "Do not do it," Boone said. He stopped 10 feet from her, holding his hands up, palms open. "It is me. It is Boone." "You brought them?" she accused, her voice high and thin, bordering on hysteria. "You told me I was safe." "I did not bring them," Boone said, keeping his voice steady, anchoring her with his tone. "They are on unrelated business. Lila, they are looking for cattle thieves. They did not ask for you." "You lie!" she cried. She was shaking violently, her whole body vibrating like a struck bell. "I saw him. I saw Vance. He knows me. He knows what I look like." "He is at the ranch house drinking coffee," Boone said. "He is not here. Only I am here." Lila backed up. Her heel caught on a loose rock, and it tumbled over the edge, clattering into the silence below. She swayed. Boone moved. He didn't run. He lunged. Closing the distance in 2 long strides, he grabbed her arm, not to restrain her, but to pull her away from the precipice. She fought him. She struck out with her free hand, hitting his chest, his shoulder, his face. She was not fighting him. She was fighting the cage, the chains, the memory of the hands that had held her down. Let me go, she sobbed. "I have you," Boone grunted, absorbing the blows. He wrapped his arms around her, pinning her arms to her sides, pulling her back from the edge until they were on solid ground. "I have you. You are safe." She collapsed. Her legs simply gave out. Boone went down with her, kneeling in the dirt, holding her as she shook. She was gasping for air, dry, heaving sobs that tore at her throat. The West watched them with indifference. The jagged ravines did not care about her fear. The cold starlight, now breaking through gaps in the storm clouds, offered no comfort. The terrifying quiet of the open land swallowed her cries. Boone did not speak for a long time. He just held her, waiting for the storm inside her to break. When her breathing finally slowed to jagged hitches, he loosened his grip. He did not let go completely, but he gave her space. He looked at her in the gloom. Her hair was wild, plastered to her face with sweat and the first drops of rain that were beginning to fall. "You ran," Boone said. "I had to," she whispered. "You said you escaped prison." Boone said he needed to hear it. He needed the full truth, stripped of the lies she had worn like armor. "You said you were convicted of murder." Lila looked up at him. Her eyes were dark holes in the pale oval of her face. "Yes." Boone felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "Who did you kill?" "Silas Crow," she said. The name came out with the weight of a curse. "The traitor?" Boone asked. He knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew the name. Crow had been a man with fingers in every pie, freight, land, cattle, a man with a smile for the public and a reputation for ruthlessness in private. "He bought me," Lila said. She pulled her knees to her chest. wrapping her arms around herself. My uncle. He had gambling debts. Crow held the notes. He offered a trade. My uncle signed the papers. Boone felt a sickness rise in his throat. That is slavery. He called it a contract, Lila said bitterly. Indenture. I was 19. I went to his house in St. Louis. I thought I was going to be a maid or a clerk. She looked at Boone, and the rawness in her gaze made him want to look away. I was not a maid, she said. He kept me in the West Wing. He put bars on the windows. He said it was for my protection. He gave me dresses. He gave me jewelry. She touched her throat. He liked to put his hands on me. He liked to see me afraid. The rain began to fall harder, cold and stinging. 2 years, she said. I endured it for 2 years. Then one night, he came in drunk. He had a ring, a ruby ring. He hit me. He said he was tired of my crying. He put his hands on my throat and he squeezed. She looked down at her hands. There was a letter opener on the desk, silver, sharp. I grabbed it. I did not think. I just wanted to breathe. You stabbed him, Boone said. Once, she said. In the neck. He looked so surprised. It was self-defense, Boone said firmly. That is what I said, Lila replied. But the judge, he played cards with Crow on Tuesdays. The prosecutor was Crow's cousin. They said I was a seductress. They said I lured him. They said I killed him to steal his money. They convicted you. 20 years, she said. I served 2 before the fire. There was a fire in the laundry block. Part of the wall collapsed. I ran. She looked at him again. Now you know. I am an escaped convict. I am a murderer in the eyes of the law. And Deputy Vance. He was the one who chained me to the wagon. He knows my face. Boone looked at her. He saw the truth in her face. He saw the exhaustion of a woman who had been running for years, even when she was standing still. He did not touch her. He did not offer empty comfort. He asked the only question that mattered to him. Did you do it to survive? Boone asked. Or did you do it because you wanted him dead? Lila held his gaze. I did it because if I had waited 1 more second, I would have been dead. And yes, I am glad he is dead. Does that make me a monster? No, Boone said. It makes you human. The rain was coming down in sheets now. Thunder cracked overhead, close and loud. We cannot stay here, Boone said. He stood up and offered her a hand. The creek beds will flood. We need cover. Lila looked at his hand. You are not taking me back to the ranch? No, Boone said. If Vance is there, we cannot risk it. And I am not taking you to jail. Then where? There is a line shack about 2 miles east, tucked under an overhang, Boone said. It is abandoned, but the roof is sound. We will wait out the storm there. I will figure out what to do. Lila hesitated. She looked at his hand, then at his face. She saw no judgment. She saw only a steady, resolving determination. She reached up and took his hand. The line shack was a small box of rough-hewn timber and sod, built into the side of a sandstone cliff. It smelled of dry earth, old pine needles, and the musty scent of neglect. But it was dry. Boone found a stash of dry wood in the corner and got a fire going in the small iron stove. The heat bloomed quickly, chasing away the damp chill of the Badlands. Lila sat on the single dusty bunk, wrapped in a moth-eaten blanket Boone had found in a chest. She was shivering, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. Boone tended the fire. He moved with efficient economy. He found a tin of coffee and a pot. He set water to boil. He did not look at her, giving her the privacy to reassemble herself. Outside, the storm raged. The wind howled against the stone, and the rain hammered the roof like 1,000 drumsticks. But inside, in the small circle of firelight, the world was quiet. Boone poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. Lila did not flinch. Drink, he said. It will help with the shock. She took the cup, wrapping both hands around the warmth. What happens now, Boone? He sat on a crate across from her. The firelight cast deep shadows on his face. highlighting the scar on his temple. "I need to know if Vance is actually looking for you," Boone said. "Or if this is just bad luck. Tomorrow, I will ride down. I will talk to Pike. I will find out what the deputies are doing. And if they are looking for me, then we find another way," Boone said. "I will not let them put chains on you again." "You could go to jail for helping me," she said softly. "Aiding a fugitive. That is a crime." "There is law," Boone said, looking into the fire. "And there is justice. They are not always the same thing. What happened to you? That was not justice." Lila looked at him. She saw the rigid set of his jaw. This man, who spoke little and worked hard, had a moral compass that pointed true north, regardless of what the map said. "Why do you believe me?" she asked. The court did not. The papers did not. Boone looked up, meeting her eyes. "Because I know a predator when I see one." "And I know prey. You fought to live, Lila. That is not murder. That is nature." The distance between them felt very small suddenly. The storm outside had isolated them, cutting them off from the rules of Red Hollow, from the laws of the territory, from the past that chased her. "I am tired of running," she whispered. "I am so tired." "Then stop," Boone said. He stood up and moved toward the bunk. He didn't loom over her. He sat on the edge, near her feet. "You are safe here," he said. "For tonight, you are safe." Lila set the cup on the floor. She looked at him, at the strength in his shoulders, at the kindness in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide behind a mask of stoicism. "Hold me," she said. It was not a demand. It was a plea. Boone hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he reached out. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. She stiffened instinctively, the old habit of bracing for pain. Boone felt it. He didn't pull away, but he didn't press. He just held her, his arms a solid, unmoving weight. He smelled of rain, horses, and wood smoke. Slowly, inch by inch, Lila relaxed. She let her head fall against his chest. She heard the steady, heavy beat of his heart. It was a slow rhythm, calm and strong. "I am not going to hurt you," he murmured into her hair. "I know," she whispered, and for the first time in years, she believed it. The intimacy of it was overwhelming. It wasn't about the friction of skin, it was about the surrender of defense. To let someone hold her was to give them the power to crush her. She was giving him that power, and he was using it to shield her. They lay down on the narrow bunk, the old blanket pulled over them. Boone lay on his back, one arm around her shoulders. Lila lay on her side, her head on his chest, her hand resting over his heart. They did not speak of the future. They did not speak of the deputies. They listened to the rain and the fire. "Boone," she whispered in the dark. "Yeah? Thank you." He tightened his arm around her slightly. "Go to sleep, Lila." She slept. She slept without nightmares. She slept without the phantom sensation of a hand on her throat. She woke to silence. The storm had passed. The air in the shack was cool and still. Sunlight was slicing through the cracks in the door, painting stripes of gold across the dust motes dancing in the air. Lila lay still for a moment, disoriented. Then she felt the warmth beside her. Boone was still asleep. His face was relaxed in a way she had never seen. The lines of tension around his eyes were smoothed out. He looked younger. He looked peaceful. Lila watched him. A strange, sharp ache bloomed in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was longing. She wanted this. She didn't just want to escape the rope. She wanted the morning. She wanted the smell of coffee on a wood stove. She wanted the quiet weight of his arm. She wanted a life where she didn't have to check the exits every time she entered a room. She realized, with a terrifying clarity, that she had fallen in love with him. Not because he saved her, but because he saw her. He knew the worst thing about her, the blood on her hands, the prison number on her soul, and he was still here. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the scar on his temple. She wanted to touch it, to trace the history of his pain as he had accepted hers. Boone's eyes opened. He didn't startle. He didn't jump. He just transitioned from sleep to wakefulness instantly, his dark eyes focusing on her face. He saw her hand hovering. He didn't move away. "Morning," he rasped, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," Lila whispered. She let her fingers touch his skin. It was warm and rough. "The rain stopped?" she said. "It did," Boone agreed. He didn't move his eyes from hers. "We have to go back," she said, the reality of the day crashing in on the peace of the morning. "Not yet," Boone said. "We have a few minutes." He reached up and took her hand, pressing his lips to her palm. It was a gesture of such startling tenderness that Lila felt tears prick her eyes. "I will find a way, Lila," Boone promised, his voice low and fierce. "I do not know how yet, but I will find a way." Lila nodded. She squeezed his hand. She knew the danger hadn't passed. The deputies were still in Red Hollow. The warrant was still active. But as she looked at the sun slicing through the door, she realized she had something she hadn't had yesterday. She had something to lose, and that made her more dangerous and more hopeful than she had ever been. "Okay, Cowboy," she said, managing a weak smile. "Let's go find out if I am still a free woman." They rose to face the day, stepping out of the shack into a world that was washed clean by the rain, bright and blindingly sharp. The Badlands stretched out before them, no longer a trap, but a landscape to be navigated, together. The wind in Red Hollow carried the taste of grit and the murmur of things that were better left unspoken. Boone Carter moved through the town not as a ranch hand, but as a man hunting for a ghost's shadow. He had left Lila at the ranch, hidden in the scullery under Hattie's fierce protection, and ridden into town with a singular purpose: to find the cracks in the marble statue of Silas Crow. Boone found what he was looking for in the back of the livery stable, sitting on an overturned crate and whittling a piece of cedar. It was Jonas, a man whose spine had been bent by 40 years of driving stagecoaches across the territories. Jonas had driven the Southern Run for a decade, the route that connected the mining camps to the trade hubs, passing right through the heart of Silas Crow's empire. Boone offered the old man a pouch of tobacco. Jonas took it with a nod. His fingers gnarled like oak roots. "I need to know about a man," Boone said, leaning against a stall door. "Silas Crow." Jonas paused in his whittling. He looked up, his eyes milky with cataracts but sharp with memory. "Dead man," Jonas grunted. "Killed by a whore. That is what the papers said." "I'm asking about the man, not the obituary," Boone said. "You drove freight for him." "I hauled his silver," Jonas corrected. "Crow was a man who liked heavy things. Silver, mahogany furniture, iron gates." He packed a pipe slowly. "He was a pillar, they say, built the church in Oakhaven, paid for the schoolhouse. And," Boone pressed. Jonas lit the pipe, the smoke curling blue and acrid in the stable air. "And he had a cellar," Jonas said quietly. "I delivered a crate there once, late at night. He did not want his servants to see it. It was heavy. It cried." Boone felt a chill slide down his spine. "It cried?" "Like a child," Jonas said. "Or a woman. Crow told me it was a rare bird from the tropics. He paid me $50 to forget I heard it. $50 was a year of wages back then." Jonas spat into the straw. "I took the money, but I never drove for him again. A man who buys silence pays because the noise is ugly." Boone left the stable with a stone in his gut. The truth was there, buried under layers of gold and fear. Crow was not a businessman. He was a collector of lives. But the town of Red Hollow did not remember the crying crate. They remembered the money. As Boone walked down Main Street, he heard the name Silas Crow spoken in the mercantile and the barber shop. The news of the murderess's potential presence had stirred up a hornet's nest of righteous indignation. "A great man," Mrs. Higgins was saying to the postmaster, "a philanthropist, and to think she cut him down in his own home. It is an attack on decency itself." The prejudice was a solid wall. To the people of Red Hollow, Silas Crow was civilization. He represented order, commerce, and the triumph of the white man's will over the frontier. Lila Hart, with her silence and her bruises, represented chaos. She was the wild thing that bit the hand that fed it. They refused to imagine the brutality she had described to Boone because to believe her was to admit that their civilization was built on a foundation of bones. Boone needed more than stories. He needed leverage. But time was running out faster than he realized. At the double bar, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. The roundup was approaching, and the men were edgy. Among them was a hand named Gus, a short, wire-muscled man with a face like a ferret and a grudge against Boone that went back 3 winters. Gus had always envied Boone's easy way with horses and the respect he commanded from Pike without ever raising his voice. Gus had been in town the night before. He had seen the wanted poster in the sheriff's office. It was a sketching, rough but accurate enough. High cheekbones, a haunted look, a reward of $500. $500 could buy a man his own spread. It could buy a lot of whiskey. Gus watched the cookhouse from the corral fence. He saw the woman, Sarah, step out to throw a basin of water into the dust. The wind caught her hair, blowing it back from her face. He saw the profile. It matched the charcoal drawing he had memorized. He waited until Boone had ridden out that morning. Then, feigning a lame horse, Gus saddled a fresh mount and slipped away toward town. He found Deputy Vance in the saloon, nursing a beer and complaining about the dust. Vance was a man who wore his authority like a suit of clothes that was too tight, uncomfortable and prone to tearing. "I know where she is," Gus said, sliding onto the stool next to the lawman. Vance looked at him with disinterest. "Who?" "The girl," Gus whispered. "The one you are hunting. The one who killed Crow." Vance straightened up. "You are sure?" "She is at the double bar," Gus said, "calling herself Sarah. Cooking for the outfit. Boone Carter brought her in." Vance smiled. It was a cold, predatory expression. "Carter, I figured he was hiding something more than just a stray cat." "I want the reward," Gus said. "You will get your money when she is in irons," Vance said. He stood up, tossing a coin on the bar. "Get your horse." Lila had not intended to go to town. She knew the danger, but Hattie had cut her hand badly on a rusted tin can, and the wound needed stitching. The old cook refused to go to the doctor, citing the cost, but the bleeding would not stop. Lila, driven by a debt of gratitude she could never repay, insisted on driving her in. "I will wear the bonnet," Lila had said. "I will stay in the wagon. Nobody will see me." It was a foolish hope, born of desperation and the false sense of security that the previous night in the line shack had given her. She felt, irrationally, that Boone's protection extended everywhere, even when he was not there. They parked the wagon behind the doctor's office. Lila helped Hattie inside, keeping her head low, her face obscured by the heavy calico sunbonnet. She sat in the waiting room, a shadow in the corner. While the doctor tended to Hattie, she did not see Gus standing across the street. She did not see Vance and his partner, a silent man named Webb, moving down the alley. When Hattie emerged, bandaged and grumbling about the sting of iodine, Lila stood up to help her. They walked out into the bright, harsh sunlight of the street. "Hold it right there!" a voice boomed. Lila froze. The voice was a trigger. It sent a shockwave through her body that locked her muscles. Deputy Vance stood in the middle of the street, his hand resting on the pearl handle of his revolver. Webb was flanking him to the left. A crowd was already forming, drawn by the sudden tension and the sight of lawmen drawing down on a woman. "Lila Hart," Vance said. He savored the name. "I told you that you could not run forever." Lila slowly raised her hands. The bonnet fell back, revealing her face. There was no point in hiding now. The mask was off. "I am not running," she said. Her voice was steady, though her knees felt like water. "You are under arrest for the murder of Silas Crow," Vance announced loudly, playing to the crowd, "and for escaping lawful custody." The town gasped. The murmur ran through the onlookers like a grass fire. "Murder! Crow! Escaped! She is the one," a man shouted. "The one working at the double bar." "Boone Carter's woman," another sneered. The social theater began. It was a performance of morality, and Lila was the villain. Men puffed out their chests, full of righteous indignation. Women clutched their shawls, staring at her with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. They looked at her not as a woman, but as a creature, something dangerous and unnatural. "He was a monster," Lila said clearly. "He bought me. He hurt me. I fought back." "Shut your mouth." Vance stepped forward. "You do not get to speak. You forfeited your voice when you slit a good man's throat." "He was not a good man," Lila cried out. "Ask the drivers. Ask the girls he trafficked." "Lies, Mrs." Higgins shouted from the boardwalk. "She is a liar and a killer. Look at her. She has the eyes of a devil." Someone threw a clump of dirt. It hit Lila's skirt, exploding in a puff of dust. Then another. A stone skittered across the ground near her feet. "Chain her up," someone yelled. Vance pulled a pair of heavy iron shackles from his belt. He smiled, walking toward her. "Turn around. Lila, let's see if these still fit." Lila trembled. The sight of the iron was worse than the gun. It was the end of her humanity. It was the return to being a thing. "No," she whispered. Vance reached for her arm. Suddenly, a horse slammed into the space between them. It was a collision of flesh and fury. Boone's roan gelding slid to a halt, kicking up a wall of dust that coated Vance and forced him to stumble back. Boone was out of the saddle before the horse had stopped moving. He did not draw his gun. He did not need to. He stood between Lila and the deputy, his back to her, his chest a wall against the law. "Step back, Vance," Boone said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a vibration that cut through the noise of the crowd. "This is not your fight. Carter!" Vance spat, wiping dust from his eyes. "She is a fugitive. You are obstructing justice." "I'm obstructing a lynching," Boone said. He looked around at the crowd, his eyes hard and accusing. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. He looked at the men holding stones. "Put it down, all of you." "She killed Silas Crow," a man shouted. "She killed a man who held her prisoner." Boone roared back. The force of his anger silenced the street. "Does anyone here know the truth? Or do you just know the money he spent?" "The court convicted her," Vance argued, stepping forward again. "The law says she hangs." "The law says she gets a hearing," Boone said. "A real one. Not a backroom deal made by Crow's poker buddies." "We are taking her to the county jail," Vance said, his hand hovering over his gun. "Now." "No," Boone said. "You take her to that jail, and she accidentally hangs herself in her cell tonight. Or maybe she tries to escape and gets shot in the back. I know how you work." "Vance, are you threatening a law officer?" "I am telling you the way it is," Boone said. "She is not going to your jail." The standoff stretched, tight as a bowstring. The deputies had the badges, but Boone had the moral weight of the town's respect, however grudging. He was a man who had never broken his word. He was a man who had ridden the range for 10 years without a stain on his name. "We have witnesses coming," Boone said. "I spoke to Jonas at the livery. There are others. We will have a hearing right here in Red Hollow, in the church, in the light of day." "I do not have to agree to that," Vance sneered. "You do," Boone said. "Unless you want to shoot me in front of 50 witnesses, because that is the only way you are getting to her right now." Vance hesitated. He looked at the crowd. The mood was shifting. They were bloodthirsty. Yes, but they were also wary of seeing Boone Carter gunned down in the street. It would be messy. It would bring questions from the territorial governor. "Fine," Vance spat. "We hold her until the circuit judge arrives next week. But she goes to the jail." "She goes to the double bar," Boone said firmly. "Protective custody. I will stand surety for her, $500. My horse, my saddle, my wages for the year." The crowd murmured. $500 was a fortune. It was everything Boone owned. "You would bet everything on a murderer?" Vance asked, incredulous. "I would bet everything on the truth," Boone said. "She stays at the ranch, under guard. If she runs, you can hang me in her place." Vance weighed the options. He wanted the reward, but he didn't want a shootout. And if Boone ran, Vance could claim the bond and the ranch's favor. Done, Vance said. But my men watch the perimeter. If she steps 1 foot off that property, we shoot to kill. Agreed, Boone said. He turned to Lila. She was standing frozen, her face pale as milk. She looked at him with wide, disbelief-filled eyes. He had just mortgaged his life for hers. Let's go home, Boone said softly. He helped her into the wagon with Hattie. He tied his horse to the back. He climbed onto the seat and snapped the reins. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, watching in silence as the wagon rolled out of town. The ride back to the ranch was silent. The sky was a vast, indifferent blue, mocking the storm that raged inside the wagon. When they arrived, Pike was waiting on the porch. He had heard the news. Bad news traveled faster than a telegraph wire. He looked at Boone, then at Lila. You brought a world of trouble to my gate. Carter, Pike said, spitting tobacco juice. I will handle it, Boone said. She stays in the bunkhouse tonight. I will watch the door. The boys are not going to like sleeping with a killer, Pike warned. Then the boys can sleep in the barn, Boone said. He took Lila to the small room at the end of the bunkhouse, usually reserved for sick hands. It was sparse, a cot, a chair, a wash basin. He brought a chair from the main room and propped it under the doorknob. Then he sat on the floor, his back against the door. Lila sat on the edge of the cot. She had not spoken since they left town. She was staring at her hands, turning them over and over as if looking for the blood everyone said was there. Night fell heavy and dark. The sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the wind in the eaves, felt distant and muffled. Why? Lila asked into the darkness. Her voice was a shard of glass. Boone looked up. Why what? Why did you not let them take me? She asked. The whole town hates me. They called me a monster. They are scared, Boone said. People hate what they fear. Maybe they are right, Lila whispered. Tears finally began to fall, hot and fast. I killed him, Boone. I watched the light go out of his eyes, and I was glad. Does that not make me a monster? She stood up and paced the small room, her hands tangling in her hair. I am poison. I ruined my family. I killed a man. Now I have ruined you. You lost your standing. You pledged your life. For what? For a whore who knows how to use a knife? Boone stood up. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He took her by the shoulders, his grip hard enough to bruise, but desperate. Stop it, he commanded. Stop saying their words with your mouth. It is the truth, she cried, trying to pull away. Look at me. I am dirt. I am looking at you, Boone shouted back, his usual calm shattering. I see a woman who walked through fire. I see a woman who refused to die. He shook her gently. Do you think I care about their laws? Do you think I care about a judge in a silk robe? I care about what is in here. He tapped her chest, right over her heart. Lila stopped fighting. She looked up at him, her chest heaving. I am so afraid, Boone. I am so afraid that I will never be anything but what they say I am. You are already more, Boone said. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. You are the bravest thing I have ever known. The air in the room changed. The fear didn't vanish, but it transmuted into something else, something fierce and reckless. It was the energy of 2 people standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding to jump together. Lila looked at his mouth. She saw the hunger there, a hunger that matched her own. It wasn't just desire, it was a need to be anchored, to be proven real. Make me forget, she whispered. Make me forget them. Boone didn't hesitate this time. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of salt and dust and defiance. Lila wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, pressing her body against his as if she could merge with him and disappear. She needed his weight. She needed his solid, unyielding presence to crush the ghost of Silas Crow that still haunted her skin. They moved to the narrow cot. The ropes creaked under their weight. Clothes were shed with frantic hands, buttons flying, fabric tearing. There was no shame in the room. Shame was for the town. Shame was for the people who threw stones. Here, in the dark, there was only skin and breath and the desperate, clawing need to be alive. When Boone touched her, he didn't touch her like a fragile thing. He touched her like a woman who could handle his strength. He ran his hands over the scars on her back, the marks of her past, and he claimed them. He kissed the hollow of her throat where the ruby ring had once choked her. "Mine," he whispered against her skin. "You are mine, not his. Mine. Yours," she gasped. "I am yours." It was an act of rebellion. Every touch was a denial of the verdict. Every kiss was a testimony for the defense. They made love with the intensity of people who might not see the sunrise. It was raw and honest and stripped of all pretense. Later, in the quiet of the deep night, they lay tangled together under the scratchy wool blanket. The wind howled outside, rattling the window pane, but inside, the silence was heavy with peace. Lila rested her head on Boone's shoulder. She traced the line of the scar on his face. "They will come for me," she said softly. "The hearing, it will be a circus." "Let them come," Boone said. He kissed the top of her head. "I will not let them bury you, Lila. We will stand in that church, and we will make them listen. And if they do not listen—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "If they do not listen," Lila finished for him. "We fight." "We fight," Boone agreed. Lila closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a fugitive. She felt like a soldier, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would rather die fighting beside this scarred cowboy than live 1,000 years in the safety of a cage. The terrible secret was out. The town knew her name, but as she fell asleep in Boone's arms, Lila realized that the secret didn't have the power to destroy her anymore, because the truth, the real truth, was lying right beside her, breathing in the dark. The Sunday church bell in Red Hollow usually rang with a clear, inviting peal that echoed off the canyon walls, calling the faithful to prayer. On this Tuesday morning, however, the bell tolled with a dull, iron-heavy thud. It was a summons not to worship, but to judgment. The hearing was to be held in the church hall, a long, rectangular building of whitewashed timber that smelled of beeswax, old hymnals, and the lingering dust of the previous Sunday's sermon. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the hall was packed. The air inside was stifling, heated by the press of bodies and the high sun beating down on the tin roof. Men stood shoulder to shoulder along the back walls, wiping sweat from their foreheads with bandanas. Women sat in the front pews, their fans fluttering like nervous moths. Lila Hart sat at a small oak table near the altar, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. She wore the plain calico dress Hattie had lent her, washed and pressed, but she felt as though she were naked. Every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on her. She could feel the weight of their stare, heavy, judgmental, and hungry for a spectacle. Boone Carter sat beside her. He wore his Sunday suit, a black wool coat that was too tight in the shoulders, and a clean white shirt that emphasized the dark tan of his neck. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the table, where he had arranged a small stack of papers and a worn leather ledger. His face was a mask of stone, but Lila could see the muscle in his jaw jumping. Deputy Vance and his partner, Webb, stood on the other side of the altar rail. Vance looked comfortable, almost bored. He leaned against the pulpit, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. To him, this was a formality, a way to appease the locals before he put the chains back on and collected his reward. Reverend Thomas, a thin man with a face like a dried leaf and eyes that held more sorrow than fire, stood behind the pulpit. He raised his hands. "Quiet," the Reverend said. His voice was soft, but it carried, "We are here to seek the truth, not vengeance. This is God's house. Conduct yourselves accordingly." The murmuring died down, replaced by the sound of boots shifting on floorboards and the buzz of a lone fly circling the rafters. "Deputy Vance," the Reverend nodded. "State your business." Vance straightened up. He hooked his thumbs into his gun belt and looked out at the crowd. "The business is simple. Reverend, this woman, known as Lila Hart, is a fugitive from justice. 2 years ago, in the city of St. Louis, she murdered Silas Crow. She was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 20 years. She escaped. The law says she goes back to finish her time. She killed a good man, someone shouted from the back. Silas Crow built the orphanage in Oakhaven. Murderous! A woman hissed from the front row. Lila flinched. Boone's hand moved under the table, covering hers. His palm was warm and rough. He squeezed her fingers, a silent command to hold fast. That is the long and short of it, Vance said, looking at Boone with a smirk. The rest is just noise. Mr. Carter, the Reverend said, turning to Boone, you claimed you had reason to delay this extradition. Speak your piece. Boone stood up. The chair scraped loud and harsh against the wood floor. He looked at the crowd, meeting the eyes of the men he had worked with, the shopkeepers he had traded with, the women who had snubbed Lila in the street. Silas Crow is dead, Boone began, his voice low and steady. Nobody denies that. Lila Hart killed him. She does not deny that. A ripple of shock went through the room. They had expected a denial. But the law draws a line between murder and survival. Boone continued. And the law you heard 2 years ago was bought and paid for. Watch your tongue, Carter, Vance warned, his hand dropping near his holster. I am done watching my tongue, Boone said. I am watching the truth. He turned to the side door. Jonas, come on in. The side door opened, and Jonas, the old stage driver, shuffled in. He looked small and frail in the large hall, clutching his hat in his hands. He walked to the front, his boots scuffing the floor. Tell them, Boone said gently. Jonas cleared his throat. He looked at the floor, unable to meet the gaze of the town's elite. I drove for Mr. Crow, Jonas said, his voice raspy. For 5 years. Hauled his freight. What kind of freight? Boone asked. Silver, furniture, Jonas said. He paused, licking his dry lips. And other things. One night, maybe 4 years back, I picked up a shipment from the railhead. A crate, big one. Addressed to the Crow estate, it was heavy. The room was silent. It was crying, Jonas whispered. Speak up, man, the banker, Mr. Higgins, shouted. It was crying, Jonas yelled back, his voice cracking. There was a girl inside. I heard her sobbing. I told Mr. Crow when I delivered it. I said, Sir, there is a person in there. He laughed. He gave me $50 gold. He said it was a rare bird. He said if I talked, I would never drive a stage again. Lies, Mrs. Higgins stood up, her face flushed. You are a drunk, Jonas. You would say anything for a bottle. I am sober today. Ma'am, Jonas said with a dignity that silenced her. And I remember the sound of that girl crying every night before I sleep. Boone nodded to Jonas, who retreated to the shadows. Crow was not a builder, Boone said to the room. He was a buyer, and he bought people. That proves nothing, Vance scoffed. Just the ramblings of an old fool. Then listen to Hattie, Boone said. Hattie, the cook from the double bar, stood up from the front pew. She was not intimidated by the crowd. She glared at them until the whispers ceased. 7 years ago, Hattie said, her voice booming like a cannon. Before I cooked for the double bar, I ran a way station on the southern route. The coaches stopped for water and beans. One hot July day, a private carriage came through. Mr. Crow was inside, and a girl. Hattie turned and pointed a thick finger at Lila. Her, Hattie said. She was younger, skinny as a rail. She had a bruise on her cheek the size of a plum. She asked to use the privy. I went with her. I saw the marks on her arms, finger marks, purple and black. Lila looked down at the table, tears stinging her eyes. She remembered Hattie. She remembered the gruff woman who had slipped her a piece of dried beef and looked at her with pity. I asked her if she needed help, Hattie said. She looked at the carriage where Crow was waiting. She was shaking so bad she could hardly stand. She said, He owns the debt. That is what she said. Not, he is my husband. Not, he is my father. He owns the debt. Hattie looked at Vance. That was not a woman traveling. That was a prisoner. The mood in the hall began to shift. It was subtle, like the turning of the tide. The righteous anger was cooling, replaced by an uncomfortable uncertainty. The image of the philanthropist was cracking. "Abuse does not justify murder," Vance said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "She should have gone to the law." "The law?" Boone laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Crow was the law in that county. Who was she going to tell? You? I have one more witness," Boone said. He reached down and picked up the leather ledger. "Or, rather, the witness sent this." He held up the book. "This is the personal ledger of Arthur Finch. He was Crow's bookkeeper for 10 years. Mr. Finch is dying of consumption in a sanitarium in Denver. He sent this to me 3 days ago via the express rider, after I wired him." Boone opened the book. The pages crinkled in the silence. Page 42. Boone read. June, 1874. Payment to Judge Miller, $1,000. Note, services rendered regarding the girl. Page 50. August, 1874. Payment to transport agent, $200. Note, silent cargo. Boone slammed the book shut. The sound was like a gunshot. "He kept records," Boone said. "He called them employment contracts. Finch calls them sales receipts. Silas Crow was running a trafficking ring under the nose of the state, and he was paying everyone to look the other way." Boone looked at Lila. "She did not kill a saint. She killed a slaver." The silence in the church hall was absolute. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. Mrs. Higgins had gone pale. The men at the back were shifting their feet, looking at their boots. Then the silence broke. "He is lying." It was the ranch hand, Gus. He was standing near the door, his face twisted with jealousy and hate. He had bet everything on the reward, and he saw it slipping away. "That book is a fake," Gus shouted. "He forged it. He's sleeping with her. He will say anything to save his whore." The word hung in the air, ugly and violent. "She is a murderer," Gus screamed, whipping the crowd into a frenzy. "She killed a man. Are we going to let a woman kill a man and walk away because she has a sad story? What about law and order?" The fracture happened instantly. The town split. Half the room, the ones who had known Boone for years, who respected Hattie, who felt the ring of truth in the testimony, stayed silent or murmured in agreement with Boone. But the other half, the ones who feared change, the ones who needed Crow to be a hero so their own world made sense, erupted. "Hand her over," a man yelled. "Justice," another screamed. The mob mentality, dormant but always present in the frontier, flared up like dry tinder. People surged forward, the aisle filled with angry bodies. "Order!" Reverend Thomas shouted, banging his hand on the pulpit. "Order in this house!" But the order was gone. Vance saw his chance. He stepped forward, drawing his gun. "That is enough. The crowd has spoken. Hand her over. Carter!" Boone moved. He grabbed Lila by the arm and pulled her behind him, backing them both into the corner near the altar. He did not draw his gun, but his hand was on the grip. "Stay back!" Boone roared. The crowd pushed against the altar rail. Faces were distorted with rage. It was no longer about the law. It was about blood. They wanted to tear down the thing that made them uncomfortable. "Give her to us!" Gus yelled, pushing his way to the front. "We will hang her ourselves." It was a terrifying, realistic danger. There were no heroes in capes. There was just a man with a scar on his face, trembling with adrenaline, shielding a woman who was shaking so hard she could barely stand. The smell of sweat and fear was pungent. Boone looked at the faces of his neighbors. He saw the blacksmith. He saw the baker. He saw men he had shared drinks with. Now, they looked like wolves. "You will have to kill me first," Boone shouted over the din. "Is that what you want? You want to kill me to get to her? Come on then. Who is first? You, Bill? You, Tom?" He called them by name, and it was a desperate gamble. He forced them to be individuals, not a mob. "Bill, you ate at my table last Christmas." Boone yelled at a man holding a piece of broken railing. "Are you going to bash my skull in?" Bill hesitated. The railing lowered an inch. "This is not justice!" Boone screamed. "This is a lynching, and if you do this, you are no better than Crow. You are worse." The crowd surged again, wavering. The pressure was immense. Lila buried her face in Boone's coat, waiting for the blow, waiting for the end. Then, a gunshot cracked. It wasn't Boone. It wasn't Vance. It was the Reverend. He had pulled a heavy dragoon pistol from beneath the pulpit and fired it into the ceiling. Dust rained down on the congregation. The echo was deafening in the enclosed space. The crowd froze. "Get back!" the Reverend thundered. He looked like an Old Testament prophet, his eyes blazing. "You desecrate this sanctuary. You bring bloodlust into the house of the Lord." He pointed the smoking gun at the mob. "Step back, or so help me God. I will send you to meet him right now." The shock of the preacher holding a gun broke the spell. The mob shuffled backward. The collective rage punctured, leaving behind shame and confusion. Vance looked at the crowd, then at the Reverend, and finally at Boone. He saw the ledger on the table. He saw the look in Jonas's eyes. He saw the resolve in Boone's face. Vance was a corrupt man, but he was a pragmatic one. He knew which way the wind was blowing. If he let the mob take her, the territory would investigate. If the ledger was real, and it looked real, Crow's name was mud. Protecting Crow was no longer profitable. "Stand down," Vance barked at the crowd. "Everyone, stand down." He turned to Boone. He holstered his gun. "We are not hanging anyone today," Vance said, his voice tight. "And I am not handing her over to a mob. She goes to the county court," Boone said, his chest heaving. "To Judge Harris. He is an honest man. We take the ledger. We take the witnesses. We do this right." Vance looked at the ledger. "If that book says what you say it does, then this is a federal matter. The marshals will want to see it." "Then let the marshals decide," Boone said. Vance nodded slowly. "Fine. We transport her to the county seat. Tomorrow. With the evidence." "I am going with her," Boone said. "I expect you are," Vance muttered. The tension in the room snapped. The mob dissolved back into individuals, shamed, muttering. Looking for the exit, they filed out of the church, leaving the silence to settle back over the dust and the heat. Lila sagged against Boone. Her legs gave way, and he caught her, holding her up. She was gasping for air, her face ashen. "I cannot do it," she whispered. "I cannot go back to court. I cannot face it again." "You can," Boone said, holding her tight. "You just faced a town that wanted you dead, and you are still standing. A judge is nothing compared to that." "They hate me," she sobbed. "Some do," Boone said. "But look." He pointed to the front pew. Hattie was still there. Jonas was still there. The Reverend was stepping down from the pulpit, laying the gun aside. "You are not alone, Lila," Boone said. "Not anymore." The departure was set for dawn. The deputies agreed to let Lila spend one final night at the ranch under guard, provided they held the ledger as security. The morning was cold and crisp, the sky a piercing blue that hurt the eyes. The wagon stood ready in the yard of the double bar. Deputy Vance and Webb sat on their horses, waiting near the gate. Lila stood on the porch of the cookhouse. She wore her travel cloak again, cleaned and mended by Hattie. She looked out at the mesa, at the land she had come to love in her short, violent time here. Boone came out of the house. He was dressed for the road, heavy coat, Winchester in the scabbard, saddlebags packed. He walked up to her. He didn't care that the deputies were watching. He didn't care that Pike was watching from the barn. "Ready?" Boone asked. "No," Lila said honestly. "But I am going. I have something for you," Boone said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He held it out to her. It was a locket, cheap gold plate, tarnished by time and weather, hanging on a frayed blue ribbon. Lila gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. "My mother's locket. I lost this years ago, at the way station." "Hattie found it," Boone said gently. "She found it in the privy after you left with Crow. She kept it. She said she knew you would come back for it someday." Lila took the locket. Her fingers trembled as she touched the cold metal. She clicked it open. Inside was a tiny, faded tintype of a woman with kind eyes and a man with a stern jaw. Her parents. Before the dead. Before the darkness. "It is who you are," Boone said. "You are not a number. You are not a crime. You are Lila Hart, daughter, survivor." He reached out and tied the ribbon around her neck. The locket settled against her collarbone, a weight that felt like an anchor. "Do not let them take your name." "Lila," Boone whispered. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, you hold on to this." Lila looked up at him. The fear was still there, lurking in the corners of her eyes. But something else was there too, a steel spine, a quiet dignity. "I will not," she said. She reached up and touched his face, her thumb brushing the scar. "Thank you, Cowboy." "Let's go," Boone said. He took her arm and led her to the wagon. He helped her up, then climbed onto his horse. He rode beside the wagon, between Lila and the deputies. As they rolled out of the gate, the sun crested the horizon, flooding the plains with golden light. The road ahead was long. The outcome was uncertain. But as Lila looked at the shadow of the cowboy riding beside her, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer running away. She was riding toward the truth, and for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid of what she would find there. The county courthouse in Oak Haven was not a place of marble pillars and soaring rhetoric. It was a squat, two-story building made of red brick that seemed to sweat in the heat of the late autumn afternoon. The floors were scarred pine, worn smooth by the boots of cattlemen, thieves, and lawyers. The air inside smelled of stale tobacco smoke, wet wool, and the nervous perspiration of men waiting for judgment. Lila Hart sat on a hard wooden bench in the front row. The iron shackles were gone, removed by Deputy Vance before they entered the building, but her wrists still felt heavy. She rubbed the skin where the metal had bitten in, her eyes fixed on the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the high, grime-streaked windows. Boone Carter sat beside her. He held his hat in his hands, turning the brim slowly, over and over. He looked tired. The ride to Oak Haven had been long, and the nights had been sleepless, spent watching the horizon for trouble that never came, but his shoulder was pressed against hers, a solid wall of warmth that kept her from shattering. Judge Harris entered the courtroom. He was a man who looked as though the prairie wind had eroded all the softness out of him, leaving only bone and gristle. He had white hair that stood up like dry grass, and eyes that had seen too many women punished for the violence of men. He sat down behind the high bench, arranged his papers, and looked over his spectacles at the crowded room. "The court is in session," Judge Harris said. His voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "We are here to review the petition regarding the prisoner Lila Hart, formerly convicted of the murder of Silas Crow." The prosecutor was a young man from the capital, eager to make a name for himself. He stood up, smoothing his waistcoat. "Your Honor, this is an open and shut case. The prisoner escaped custody. She is a convicted killer. The law demands she be returned to the penitentiary to serve the remainder of her 20-year sentence. The law demands justice, Mr. Prosecutor," Judge Harris said dryly, "not blind obedience. I have read the affidavits provided by Deputy Vance and Mr. Carter. I will hear the witnesses." Jonas was the first called. The old stage driver looked even smaller in the witness chair than he had in the church. He gripped the railing with gnarled hands. "Tell the court what you told the people of Red Hollow," the judge commanded. Jonas recounted the story of the crying crate. He spoke of the weight of it. He spoke of Silas Crow's laugh. He spoke of the $50 gold that had burned a hole in his conscience for 4 years. The courtroom, usually a hive of whispering and shuffling, went silent. Then came Hattie. She marched to the stand like she was walking into battle. She described the bruises. She described the terror in Lila's eyes at the way station. "She was not a wife," Hattie told the judge, her voice ringing off the rafters. "And she was not a guest. A guest does not ask permission to use the privy. A guest does not flinch when a hand is raised." Finally, Boone stepped forward. He placed the leather ledger on the judge's bench. It was the physical weight of the truth. "Arthur Finch kept this book," Boone said. "He was Crow's right hand. He is dying in Denver, but he swore an oath on this ledger before a notary 3 days ago. It details payments for human cargo. It details bribes to local magistrates. It details the purchase of Lila Hart." The judge opened the book. He adjusted his spectacles. He turned the pages slowly. The silence in the room stretched thin, tight as a wire fence. "Silas Crow was a slaver," Boone said. "He hid behind money and a church pew. Lila Hart did not kill a man in cold blood. She killed a captor who was choking the life out of her." The prosecutor jumped up. "Objection! This is conjecture. The victim is not here to defend himself." "The victim is sitting right there," Judge Harris said, pointing a finger at Lila. "Sit down, counselor." The judge closed the book. He took off his spectacles and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Lila. For the first time, she looked back at him. She did not lower her eyes. She did not beg. She simply waited. "I have sat on this bench for 30 years, Judge Harris said quietly. "I have sent men to the gallows. I have sent boys to the reformatory. I have seen the law used as a shield for the wicked and a sword against the weak." He leaned forward. "The original trial of Lila Hart was a farce," the judge stated. "The evidence of coercion and trafficking was suppressed. This ledger proves that Silas Crow was engaged in criminal enterprise of the vilest nature." He picked up his gavel. "However," the judge continued, "a life was taken. The law cannot simply ignore a corpse, but the law recognizes the right to preserve one's own life." Lila held her breath. Boone's hand found hers under the table and squeezed hard. "In light of the new evidence and the testimony of credible witnesses regarding the deceased's pattern of violence and imprisonment," Judge Harris announced, "I am commuting the sentence of Lila Hart to time served." A gasp went through the room. "Furthermore," the judge said, his voice rising over the noise, "I am entering a formal order of reconsideration into the territorial record. Let it be known that the conviction was born of a failure of due process. Lila Hart is released from custody, effective immediately. She is a free woman." The gavel came down. Bang! It was not a sound of doom this time. It was the sound of a lock breaking. Lila did not move. She could not. She sat frozen on the bench, the words washing over her like rain after a drought. "Free woman." Boone turned to her. His face was broken open with a relief so profound it looked like pain. "It is over. Lila, it is done." She looked at him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He believed me." "He saw you," Boone said. They walked out of the courthouse into the blinding white light of noon. There was no cheering crowd. There was no parade. It was just a dusty street in a cattle town. But the air tasted different. It tasted like oxygen, not iron. Deputy Vance was waiting by the hitching rail. He looked at Lila, then tipped his hat. It was a stiff gesture, but it was respectful. "Good luck to you, Miss Hart," Vance said. "Stay out of trouble." "I intend to," Lila said. Her voice was steady. She stood on the boardwalk, watching the town of Oakhaven move around her. People were buying flour. A dog was barking at a wagon. Life was going on. But for the first time in 2 years, she was part of it, not separate from it. "Let's go home," Boone said. Home, however, was no longer the double bar. When they returned to Red Hollow 3 days later, the news had preceded them. The town was quiet as their wagon rolled down Main Street. Heads turned. Curtains twitched. They rode straight to the ranch. Pike was waiting for them at the gate. He did not invite them in. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, chewing on a piece of straw. "I heard the news," Pike said. "Judge Harris let her go." "He did," Boone said, "because she was innocent." "The law says she is free," Pike said, "but the owners, they see it different. They say having a woman with her reputation on the payroll is bad for business. They say having a foreman who defies the Cattlemen's Association is worse." Boone nodded. He had expected this. The West was built on reputation, and he had spent his on Lila. "I understand," Boone said. "I will collect my wages and my gear." "I have your pay here," Pike said, handing Boone an envelope. And I have a message from Old Man McGregor. He runs the Starcross outfit down in the San Juan Valley. He heard what you did. He needs a foreman who does not scare easy. The pay is less, but the land is good." Boone took the envelope. "Tell McGregor I will be there." Pike looked at Lila. His expression was unreadable, caught between the hard code of the range and the human reality of what he had heard. He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am." "Mr. Pike," Lila said. Boone gathered his things from the bunkhouse. He packed his saddlebags and loaded his few possessions into the wagon. He did not look back at the double bar. It had been a job. It had been a shelter. But it was not his life. They drove back through Red Hollow one last time. The reaction of the town was a map of human nature. As they passed the mercantile, Mrs. Higgins stepped out. She saw Lila sitting on the wagon seat, head held high. Mrs. Higgins stopped. She turned her back deliberately, pretending to study a display of calico in the window. Her judgment was a stone she refused to put down. But further down the street, the baker, a large man named Olson, came out wiping flour from his hands. He took off his apron and waved. It was a small gesture, awkward and hesitant, but it was an acknowledgement. And outside the church, Reverend Thomas stood on the steps. He did not wave. He simply nodded, a slow, solemn inclination of his head. It was a benediction. Lila sat straight. She did not smile at the baker. She did not glare at Mrs. Higgins. She realized she did not need their forgiveness. She did not need their permission to exist. The locket around her neck felt warm against her skin. She knew who she was. "Are you all right?" Boone asked, glancing at her. "I am," Lila said. "Keep driving. Boone." They left Red Hollow behind. They left the gossip and the judgment and the narrow minds of people who had never had to fight for their breath. The San Juan Valley was different. It was greener, fed by the meltwater of the high peaks. The mountains rose like jagged cathedrals on the horizon, blue and white against the sky. The Starcross was a small operation. It was hardscrabble land, rocky and stubborn. The cabin Boone and Lila were given was little more than a shack with a stone chimney and a leaking roof. But it was theirs. They rebuilt it with their own hands. Boone cut the timber, his axe ringing in the crisp morning air. Lila mixed the mud for chinking, her hands working the earth until they were brown and strong. They worked from sunrise to sunset, falling into bed exhausted, smelling of pine resin and honest sweat. It was not a fairy tale. The winter came early and hard, burying the cabin in 4 feet of snow. They lost a calf to a mountain lion. The roof leaked until Boone tarred it 3 times. There were nights when the wind howled so loud it sounded like the ghosts of the past trying to get in. But they did not get in. One evening, deep in January, the fire was roaring in the hearth. Boone was mending a bridle, the leather creaking in his hands. Lila was reading a book the Reverend had given her before they left, a book of poetry. She looked up at Boone. The scar on his face was silver in the firelight. He looked older, tired, but the shadow that had always lived in his eyes was gone. "Boone," she said. He looked up. "Yeah, I used to think love was a trap," she said. "I thought it was just a pretty word men used when they wanted to own you. I thought it was a cage with velvet bars." Boone set the bridle down. He watched her, his expression soft. "And now?" he asked. "Now I think it is this," she said, gesturing to the small, warm room, to the snow piling up against the window, to the man sitting across from her with calloused hands. "It is work. It is showing up when it is hard. It is standing in front of a gun for someone else." Boone stood up and walked over to her. He sat on the rug beside her chair, resting his arm on her knee. "It is a frontier," Boone said. "It is wild country. You never know what is over the next ridge, but you ride it anyway." Lila reached down and ran her fingers through his hair. "I am glad I rode it with you." "There is nowhere else I would rather be," Boone said. He kissed her hand. It was a gesture of reverence, but also of partnership. They were equals. They were survivors. They were 2 broken things that had fitted themselves together to make something whole. Spring came to the valley in a rush of green and gold. The river swelled, loud and rushing, carving its way through the stone. Lila stood on the porch of the cabin she had helped build. She watched Boone riding across the meadow, checking the new calves. He sat tall in the saddle, a silhouette against the vast, open sky. She took a deep breath. The air smelled of sage and wet earth and possibility. She thought of the prison cell. She thought of the courtroom. She thought of the town that had called her a monster. Those things were still part of her history, written in the scars on her soul, but they were not her future. The West stretched out before her, wide and indifferent and beautiful. It did not promise her ease. It did not promise her safety. It promised her only what she could hold with her own two hands. It promised her choice. Lila smiled. She turned back into the house to start the morning coffee. The door swung shut behind her, but this time, it was not locked. Thank you all for listening to Let Me Go, Cowboy. I hope you enjoyed this journey through the Wild West, from the dusty streets of Red Hollow to the quiet peace of the San Juan Valley. It has been a pleasure bringing Lila and Boone's story to life for you. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this series, please subscribe to the From Wild West channel so you do not miss our next adventure. Share your thoughts on the ending in English. Did Lila and Boone find the peace they deserved? Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.